Hi everyone, my name is Sreedhevi Iyer. You can call me Sri, and I am the author of The Tiniest House of Time. I'm very pleased and grateful to say that the book Tiniest House of Time has been shortlisted for the BOTI 2021 or the Book of the Year Awards organized by the Small Press Network. It's been a great privilege to be a part of this shortlist. And as a part of this, I'd like to read out a quick excerpt from the book. Now, the book itself travels through two very distinct timelines. There's one timeline that's set in the 1930s in Burma, and there's a second timeline with, sort of related but separate set of characters that occurs in the 1990s in Malaysia. So the bit that I'm going to read out to you occurs in the second timeline in Malaysia in the 90s. And this focuses on a particular character called Sandhya, Sandhya Sastri, who is in her late teens and is studying at a hostel, at a sort of mixed gender, mixed race hostel in Kuala Lumpur. And because it's the 90s and there were a lot of much political strife in Kuala Lumpur at the time, Sandhya in some ways has found herself mired in this political strife. And it is especially reflected in how she deals with a new relationship that comes into her life. She starts to fall in love with Faisal, someone who also studies at the hostel, but who, unlike Sandhya, is Malay. They're of two different races. And this is something that Sandhya is probably a lot more aware of than Faisal is at this point. So here we get into a point where both Sandhya and Faisal have just returned from a political rally where they were sort of forced to deal with some of the emotions with each other. And it follows from there, and it follows how the relationship develops from that point. I hope you enjoy it. Sandhya returned to the hostel, spent from the rally, her hair and clothes wet, her skin chilled. She imagined a sheen of guilt sticking to her skin, like the dried sweat the students scrubbed off in the showers. She walked up the hostel ramp and corridors alone, convinced this wrongness was shockingly visible to all, like one of the placards at the rally, proclamatory and outrageous. She took care to remove her makeshift headscarf and reapply her potu, but the sheen still covered her. Then there was the impossible notion that she could still smell Faisal's scent on her, that it would haunt her for days afterwards. When she saw him again, he was stepping out of the dean's office through a teak door that led him straight onto the cement kaki lima. Sandhya was convinced it was about the policeman, but when Faisal met her eyes and paused mid-step, she knew she would not ask him about it. She merely watched him walk up the narrow footpath to her, squirming at their looming proximity. Other students walked by, and Sandhya weirdly felt it was a wonder nobody thought to stop and point. Faisal must have read something on her face and stopped. It's very hot today. Sandhya wanted to laugh. Some iced tea? She did laugh. It was also American. She nodded. Over the following weeks, they began to meet more often. Ida, as the go-between, complained at the juvenility of her role. The venues changed each time. Hawker centers, hostel rooftops, even suburban parks. The parks initially made Sandhya wary since they were notorious venues for illicit physical relations, clandestine romances reduced to quickies behind bushes. Yet Faisal barely touched her. They talked instead, and sometimes held hands. He asked her questions nobody else did, and she answered with words she didn't know she had. They spoke of music, movies, history. They spoke about their respective high schools and who they were in those places, those times, as if they were a lifetime ago. They disagreed often, although if the disagreement was particularly strong, Faisal would reach over and put his arm around Sandhya, and everything would settle down. There had been no plans on when or how they would touch. They were sitting on the cement floor of the hostel rooftop, watching the lights twinkling on the new towers. One of the towers seemed to be overtaking its twin, with jagged edges clawing at the inky maw of sky, giving the impression of destruction rather than creation. Sandhya had finally finished Hikayat Hang Tuah and could not believe Faisal saw it so differently. How can Hang Jebat be the hero when he went on that crazy killing rampage? Sandhya said. But you have to see beyond those fundamentals, Sandy. Look at his intentions. He was avenging the wrong against his best friend, who also thought Hang Jebat was mad and fought him to stop him. Tuah's the one on the right track. He fights to keep order at all costs. Faisal blinked at her. Yes, but it's also because of the Sultan, and the Sultan is corrupt. What's the point of obeying someone who you know is not doing the job? The Sultan loyalty thing is beside the point, Sandhya shook her head. Oh, that is so the whole point. I can't believe you don't see this. Instead of answering him, she punched his shoulder. He laughed. That's it, he said, and tickled her sides. She shrieked with surprise, and he had to shush her. She knew what would come next. When he dipped his head, she looked up at the sky and realized there was a new moon. Her breath caught so deeply, she would only exhale 3 days later, vacantly staring at a history book. She had tried to commit the physical moves to memory, but could only recollect visceral mingling and the irrelevant pain of clinging on to the wire fence to keep quiet, to stop from moaning and bringing attention. Faisal seemed ardent, devoted, unflinching, but could drop his attention as abruptly as his sudden invitations. Sandhya sometimes caught her fingers trembling as she turned pages in a book or held the telephone as she immersed herself in the newness of gauging when Faisal might emerge on the horizon with plans and movies and walks and kisses. We've decided to call it Grakat, he said one day, referring to the momentum his meetings had taken. A new party, a solution. I think it's a great name, movement. And then in the same breath, I'll take you to the inauguration. We'll sign up together. Sandhya concentrated on her right hand in his clasp before conjuring her excuses. She had no idea about these things, that she couldn't fathom herself fitting into their Malay framework, but mostly that he was saying all this with just love and enthusiasm, without reality or thought. When all else failed, she fell back on the feeble and obvious. How can you think of exams at a time like this? Faisal said at once, annoyed. How can I not? The first paper is in 5 days. Don't you care what happens? Of course I do. But? Sandhya couldn't answer. And after a few minutes, Faisal gently let go of her hand. They didn't say a word to each other as they returned to their respective hostels. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that excerpt. And I look forward to seeing you in real life in some literary event very soon. Thank you.